They said the Wilkins house in Southern Virginia had been empty for decades. But when sheriff's deputies finally broke the rusted lock on its basement door, what they found below turned even the hardest stomachs cold. The air was thick not just with rot, but with something older, something human that had been left to decay in silence. Old photographs were nailed to the walls, their faces scratched out. A small wooden crib lay overturned beside a pile of bones so fragile they powdered at a touch. And in the far corner, chained to a steel beam, was a diary, a story written in trembling hands that told the truth no one was ready for. The man who wrote it had locked away his own bloodline. Hi, hello everyone. If you've stumbled into this story, you've stepped into something real, something that the newspapers buried. I'm warning you, once you know what happened in that basement, you'll never look at family the same way again. So subscribe, stay with me till the end, and tell me where are you watching from, and at what time, because when the night deepens, that's when this story truly begins. The Wilkins family wasn't known for much, a quiet group who kept to themselves on the edge of the Appalachian woods. But neighbors often whispered that the screams echoing through the valley weren't coyotes. Some said they'd seen candlelight flicker through the basement window at 3 a.m. Others swore they'd heard a woman calling for help. No one dared to check. By the time the authorities did, the old patriarch Thomas Wilkins had long vanished, but the remnants of his life told enough. Handmade cages, small enough for children, handwritten prayers scrawled on the walls begging forgiveness, and carved deep into the stone foundation a single word repeated over and over. Pure. What pure meant to Thomas would soon come to light. When the sheriff's team lifted that rusted chain from the floor, they didn't expect it to rattle like a heartbeat. Every corner of the basement breathed with something foul, a mix of mildew, sweat, and old blood. One officer found a tattered leather book half buried under broken jars and bones. Its cover was cracked, but the words inside were alive, like they were whispering from the past. The diary belonged to Thomas Wilkins, dated 1946 to 1961, nearly 15 years of madness written in perfect cursive. The first pages spoke of love of a wife named Mary, and 3 children, Grace, Illy, and June. But as the pages darkened, so did his tone. Thomas wrote about purity, about cleansing the bloodline from outsiders, and about keeping the family together no matter the cost. By 1952, he wrote, "The world is corrupt. Only within us, it remains clean. They won't understand what I'm doing. They'll call it evil, but it's devotion." And below those lines, a chilling drawing. A spiral, inside it, 4 faces all identical, all twisted versions of his own. Hi, hello friends. Are you still with me? Because what they uncovered next wasn't just horror, it was history buried alive. Comment where you're watching from right now. I want to know if the night feels heavier where you are too. Behind the basement wall, officers found another door, smaller, hidden behind boards nailed shut. When they broke it open, a wave of stench hit them so strong that one man vomited right there. Inside were 3 crude wooden beds, a few rusted plates, and faint chalk drawings on the walls, stick figures holding hands. And in one corner, a pile of children's clothing so old it disintegrated to dust when touched. They realized then the Wilkins children never left that basement. And the family tree Thomas wanted to purify? It had no branches left. The diary's final entries weren't words anymore, they were commands. Lines carved so deep into the paper that they tore through to the next page. They tried to leave me, but family doesn't leave. Thomas Wilkins had transformed from a father into something else, a prophet of his own madness. In his mind, he was chosen to preserve the pure line of blood, untouched by outsiders. He wrote that the world was rotting, and that he had to begin again with the ones he made. When investigators pieced it together, they realized that after Mary, his wife, tried to escape with the children, Thomas sealed the basement door. He starved them until obedience became instinct. Then he forced them into his delusion of creation. The drawings on the wall weren't art. They were a family tree redrawn, generation after generation, in circles instead of branches. Hi, hello, friends. If you're still watching this far, I want you to take a breath. This is where the story crosses from horror to something human, something no one should have to imagine. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the next part of this story reveals the final truth behind those walls. Tell me where you're from: Virginia, Texas, or maybe somewhere far from these woods. Because after you hear this, the Wilkins name won't leave your head tonight. When the sheriff's team analyzed the bones, they found multiple DNA matches too close to be normal. Father, daughter, brother, son, all connected by one name. Thomas had kept his children alive for years, forcing them to continue the bloodline beneath his house. By the time he disappeared, no one knew how many generations had been born and died under those floorboards. Some say the cries can still be heard when the wind passes through those hills at night, the sound of a family that was never allowed to end. When authorities sealed the Wilkins property after the discovery, they thought the nightmare was over. But the nightmare had only gone quiet. For months, the town of Crawford Hollow whispered of strange sounds coming from the abandoned house: tapping, dragging, soft humming at midnight. Local teens dared each other to peek through the basement window. None stayed long enough to see what moved in the dark. A year later, in 1963, two state investigators, Agent Morris and Deputy Cole, reopened the case, hoping to locate Thomas Wilkins. What they found was worse than absence. The diaries' last entry, previously unreadable due to rot, had begun to reveal new words, faint but fresh, written in ink that shouldn't have survived. They're still here. I made sure of it. Hi, hello, everyone. Before we go deeper, if you're still watching this late at night, tell me the time. Because from this point, every minute feels longer. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Trust me, you'll want to know how this ends. The agents found something behind the fireplace, a crawl space barely big enough for a man to fit through. Inside, the air was cold, unnaturally still. Cole went in first, shining his flashlight along the brick wall. He saw something carved into the mortar, a handprint, small and perfect, pressed into solid stone. But when he reached to touch it, the print was warm. Morris swore he heard breathing behind them, faint but deliberate. He turned his light, nothing, only dust swirling where the beam moved. But when they stepped out, the crawl space had sealed itself shut, as if the house had never allowed them in at all. 2 weeks later, Deputy Cole was gone. His car found on Route 12, engine running, doors open. The only thing left in the passenger seat was a piece of old paper, a torn scrap from the Wilkins diary. On it, a single line written in fresh black ink: "Blood keeps me home." By the 1970s, the Wilkins house had become a warning. Locals called it the Hollow's Heart. No one went near it after sundown. The few who dared claimed to hear a man's voice humming hymns through the cracks in the earth. Others saw candlelight flickering under the door, though the house had no electricity left. In 1978, a group of college students from Richmond decided to document the myth part of a local folklore project. Only one of them, Caroline Heath, ever spoke publicly afterward. Her footage was found years later, a shaky handheld camera panning through the ruined halls, the sound of dripping water echoing beneath. Then, faintly, a whisper: "Grace." That was Thomas Wilkins's eldest daughter's name. Caroline said the whisper came from behind her, but when she turned, there was no one. She fled before reaching the basement, but her camera caught something, a tall shadow, standing at the base of the stairs. Its head tilted unnaturally, its shoulders uneven, as though bones had been broken and set wrong. Hi, hello, friends. I know this is getting darker, but this is real. These records exist: local police reports, newspaper clippings, eyewitness statements. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you dare step inside a house that breathes. And hey, subscribe if you're brave enough to finish this story, because what's coming next might be the reason people still see lights in Crawford Hollow. By the early 2000s, hikers began reporting sightings of a man in the woods near the old property, always at twilight, always tall, always barefoot. He never spoke, but sometimes, they said, he followed them to the tree line and stopped there, humming softly as they ran. DNA testing on bones found in the woods in 2003 confirmed something impossible. One of the skeletons matched the Wilkins bloodline, but the remains were only 20 years old. By 2012, the Wilkins property had decayed to little more than a skeleton, rotted beams, sagging roof, and a basement that had swallowed itself in mud and time. Locals petitioned to demolish it, hoping to erase the curse that hung over Crawford Hollow. On a gray November morning, a demolition crew arrived with bulldozers, ready to end a century of silence. But when the first wall collapsed, the ground shuddered, not like old earth breaking, but like something moving below. The foreman, Ed Talbot, ordered the men to stop. Beneath the house was a hollow space no one had seen before, a chamber hidden deeper than the original basement, sealed behind layers of clay and bone. The workers lowered a camera through the opening. The feed showed a room lined with wooden crosses, each one carved by hand. In the center, a long wooden table covered in jars filled with murky liquid. Floating inside were small, pale shapes. Hands, teeth, tiny human remains, and on the wall, one phrase written in perfect red: "The blood must remain." Hi, hello everyone. If you're still here, take a breath. This isn't a story anymore, it's evidence. Subscribe now if you haven't, because the final section reveals the last thing found in that chamber, something that proves the Wilkins name didn't die underground. Tell me where you're from, and if your night's quiet. Listen closely. Authorities sealed the site again within hours, but before they left, Ed Talbot noticed something impossible. His crew's head count was off by one. A young worker named Derek Lyle, only 19, was missing. His helmet was later found at the edge of the hole, the inside smeared with mud, but no one ever found his body. The excavation was shut down permanently 2 days later. The county declared the land unstable. But the locals still say you can hear the sound of shovels digging there at night. 10 years after the demolition, the land where the Wilkins farmhouse once stood was sold at auction to a private buyer, a woman named Lydia Marsh, who claimed to be writing a history book on rural Virginia families. She moved onto the property in 2022, building a small cabin near where the old foundation had been. Locals warned her not to stay there after dark. She laughed it off. 2 months later, Lydia vanished. When police searched the cabin, they found her research pinned to the walls: photos of the Wilkins family, maps of Crawford Hollow, and one chilling discovery. Lydia was a descendant of Grace Wilkins, Thomas's eldest daughter. His blood had come home. Hi, hello everyone. If you've made it to the end, you've just heard a story that's haunted Virginia for over a century. Before we finish, drop in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are, because this is the hour when the Wilkins come calling. And don't forget to subscribe. You'll want to see what we uncover next. Investigators found Lydia's cabin door wide open. The floorboards beneath her desk were torn apart from below, as though something had pushed upward. The boards splintered outward, and below them, the soil was hollow again. Inside the opening, they found a rusted metal box wrapped in cloth. Inside that box, the diary. The same diary sealed by police in 1962. But the ink was fresh. The last line read, "Blood remembers." Since then, no one's dared to live within 10 miles of Crawford Hollow. The land remains fenced, guarded, and silent. But locals swear the cabin lights still flicker once a year, every November 12th, the night the first house fell. Some say it's the wind. Others say it's the Wilkins family gathering again, somewhere beneath the earth, keeping their bloodline alive. And if you drive past on that night, roll up your windows. Because sometimes, if you listen close enough, you'll hear a man humming a father's voice, still waiting for his family to come home.